Whoever's next elected Illinois governor has the sympathy of Jim Edgar.
That's right. Edgar had the state's top job for 2 terms in the 90s and faced a fiscal mess of his own when he took office. But he says that was child's play compared to what's going on now. We sat down with the former governor recently to discuss the current budget crisis and the race for governor. He says it'll take a lot of unpopular decisions to turn the state around.
The most important part is going to be cuts. And cuts like we've never seen. I think that's going to be extremely difficult because we're going to have to cut good programs. We're going to have to cut programs that provide necessary services, but we just don't have the money. Now, I think once we agree on those cuts, then we can discuss raising taxes. But you can't deal with taxes until you make the cuts, or you won't make the cuts. But I don't think that's going to be as difficult as the cuts, because the cuts are going to have to be severe, and it's going to have to affect education, health care, things that so far the legislature has not wanted to cut, or the governor has not wanted to cut. And it's going to take a governor who will provide the leadership. Governor by himself or herself cannot, right the ship that's off course, but the governor is the key player. And if the governor is not doing his job, then this won't get done.
How has Pat Quinn done since he took over for Rod Blagojevich? I mean, he inherited a big mess, but in your opinion, how has he functioned?
Well, I think we missed a great opportunity. When he first became governor right after the impeachment proceedings, when you had Republicans and Democrats apparently working together in Springfield, a new governor, I had high hopes that maybe we'd begin to address this problem. That didn't happen. I'll blame part of that on the legislature, which is controlled by the Democrats. And I'll blame part of it on Governor Quinn. He had a tendency to change positions too many times. And one of the things I learned, you've got to have some convictions to your position. You got to stick with it, because the legislature, particularly if they're tough, call for tough decisions. The legislature doesn't want to do it. So they're going to think of every reason not to do it. I think he inherited a mess, but it's worse today than it was when he became governor.
Now, in terms of the current governor's race, Governor Quinn, of course, is calling for an income tax increase. His Republican opponent, Bill Brady, you once called his budget ideas naive. So is he misleading voters when he says he's going to cut 10%, he's not going to raise taxes, and he's going to balance the budget and fix this?
Well, let's clarify what I said was naive. The thought that your cuts would be across the board, not the 10%. In fact, if anything, I told him, I don't know if 10% is enough. And he now says that he didn't intend to mean across the board, and he's made that very clear, I think, the last few months. He's not talking across the board. So I don't have really any problem with his proposals on cuts. And I think the cuts are going to take more courage than the tax increase. And it's going to have to be much more substantial.
But is Bill Brady putting himself in a bind by campaigning saying he won't raise taxes when the consensus seems to be that you can't get out of this hole without raising some kind of taxes?
Well, it's not something that position I would take. And I ran for governor twice and never took no new tax position. I'm more concerned about the cuts. To me, that's the bigger challenge. And my sense is that Brady has been talking about that. I don't think Governor Quinn has addressed that, and he says he's made the cuts, but really the cuts made so far are insignificant compared to what's going to have to be done. No matter who's the governor, whether it's Senator Brady or Pat Quinn, if they do their job right, they're probably going to make everybody in the state real mad. And that might be their last 4 years as governor. But if they don't do the job right, there may not be anything to govern in 4 years.
There are reports that you're going to endorse Bill Brady in the governor's race.
Well, I mean, I said several months ago I was going to vote for him. I'm not sure what more people need, but we'll wait and see. Are you going to make a formal announcement? We'll wait and see what develops.
We're still awaiting that formal announcement. Our panel will weigh in on Governor Edgar's comments coming up next.
And we'll discuss other topics this week in politics. That's right after this.
We're back with our panel, David Yepsen, Jane Bryant, and Bill McMorris. And David, we want to turn to you first for your comments on Jim Edgar's thoughts on the governor's race and the state budget crisis.
Jim Edgar has a lot of credibility with people, and I think he speaks the truth. Look, this state has got a huge budget problem, and you're not going to get there without making dramatic cuts. I'm talking about radical cuts. I'm talking about asking questions about whether we need so many state universities, whether we need so many community colleges, whether we need so many prisons, whether we need so many poor people getting their health care. Once people go through that and they see the pain of all that, then maybe they'll be more willing to support tax increases. But right now, every poll shows people in Illinois do not favor tax increases. They do not trust their political leadership. They have no credibility with voters to tell them to tell them things. And there are many economists who say it's a dumb idea to be raising taxes in a recession. So once you go through all that, then you reach a point where, okay, maybe voters, the pain of raising taxes isn't as great as the pain of all these cuts we're having to endure. But that's a couple years down the road.
Jim Edgar would not endorse Bill Brady's no tax pledge. Jane, is he kind of winking at the voters saying we're going to raise taxes if Bill Brady is elected governor, but we're just not going to talk about it because voters don't want to hear that right now?
Well, I think that they probably can't get away eventually not raising taxes. It seems like they would have to cut the entire budget to get us at square one again. So I think that those raised taxes are down the line, but we don't know when.
And Pat Quinn is trying desperately to make this an issue in the governor's race. He continues to call out Bill Brady, saying, you know, he isn't being square with voters about this, that a tax increase is needed. But is that gaining any traction?
I mean, Governor Quinn is behind in just about every poll that's out there. And the chief reason for it is because he has pretty much made the principal issue of his campaign raising taxes. So he's running on a very unpopular platform. Now, I'm going to have to agree with Dave that when you look at this, you know, eventually down the road, we might have to raise some taxes. But the only way to get there is to first cut. And I don't think Pat Quinn has much credibility as a budget cutter. He keeps mentioning $300 million in cuts, but we need $13 billion. So that is something that Pat Quinn and Governor Brady and Senator Brady should both consider when they're talking about this tax issue.
Eden, I ran into Governor Edgar at a reception at the old state capitol in Springfield. We were talking about budget cuts, and he told me, he said, you know, when they're done with what they have to do, you're going to be able to fit state government back into this capitol.
Yeah, he had some, he says it's a day of reckoning that is coming for Illinois sooner or later. Now, Dana, new this past week in the governor's race, Pat Quinn made a deal trying to save money with the AFSCME State Workers Union. Tell us a little bit about that.
He did. He basically locked the state into an agreement through 2012 where AFSCME would guarantee no layoffs, and if I understand correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, their pay would stay the same. Which basically he said, you know, this is an agreement that's going to save our state money, and this is good for the state overall. But then a couple days later, AFSCME comes out and endorses Governor Quinn in the election, and this gives the Brady campaign all kinds of opportunities to say, oh, this was a backroom deal, and the governor is not being smart with our money, and whatnot. To me, this goes back to what is just has to be so aggravating for, I think, any Democrats in this race, anybody down the ticket, where the governor continues to do things where it's like, what are you thinking? And maybe this was fiscally a sound decision. I don't know. I'd like you guys to weigh in on that. But politically, I don't understand how they're running this campaign.
And the governor,
just baffles me.
Governor is in such a tough position because he is the acting governor of Illinois, and he has to make tough decisions, whereas Bill Brady can kind of sit on the sidelines, Bill, and just criticize what the governor does.
Well, I mean, that's a complaint that any party in power is going to make. Oh, well, you're playing the sidelines. Well, you've been coaching the team for the past few years, and what results have you given us? And with this AFSCME deal, we really do see, I guess, a failure of politics for Pat Quinn. He's tied the hands of the legislator. He's tied the hands of whoever the next governor is going to be by signing into this deal. Well, once he says there can't be any layoffs until 2012, that makes it that much harder for legislators down the road and for the next governor to come back and try to, you know, make cuts to lay off workers. It might be a necessity, especially if we're talking, as Dave was saying before, about hard cuts. Those cuts are going to have to come from the labor force and state government.
Eden, are we shocked that a Democratic governor cuts a deal with a labor union and in return the union endorses them?
No, probably not. But I still think it was just poor politics, and it surprises me. I question the public policy, and I question the political decision.
We'll see how it plays out in the coming weeks, and
Sure
we'll
will.
be watching it right here alongside our panel the whole time on our new segment here on News 3, This Week in Politics. We thank you for joining us for this first edition of our new program, and we hope to see you next week.
Take care.